for me continually frightening. And by that I simply mean the reducing of the gospel of Jesus Christ into abstract concepts, making it into a worldview that is in competition with other world views. The gospel, in one way of putting it, is always contentless. It gets its content out of the times in which it is declared. Or to put it another way, the gospel is always happening and never, in the first instance, concept. The concepts that are associated with it are those that we use to try to articulate that which is not a concept, namely the happening that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is to say that theologizing is a parasitical enterprise, or theology is a parasitical discipline. It only exists over against the wisdom of the time and the place in which theologizing is carried on. This is to say that only in the light of the psychological sciences, the sociological sciences, the natural sciences, the artful humanities, the historical humanities, and the philosophical humanities, is there such a thing as theologizing. It sort of reminds me of a bit of mistletoe, which sits on its own bottom, but its bottom sits on the bottom of an oak tree, for instance. Now, nobody ever got a bit of mistletoe mixed up with the oak tree, and yet it does not exist, save in relationship to the oak tree. And perhaps this is one way that content can come into such a category as the eschatological, which is nothing in itself, but only is there in relationship to the isnesses. This is why that to almost caricature the picture of the church that Paul used Gnosticism to articulate the gospel. Augustine used the second revival of Platonism a la Plotinus. That Thomas Aquinas used Aristotelianism to articulate the gospel. That Calvin used the second revival of Stoicism, that Luther used nominalism, that Wesley was not much of a clear-headed thinker, but like all eclectics managed to get something said, used the Platonic third revival of Platonism out of the Cambridge school, the third revival of Stoicism, Lockean psychology, and what I call an inverted Newtonian science. That is, he used Newton to beat Newton over the head, and therefore got it incorporated into the very basic structure of his own reflection on the happening that was the gospel. In the last century, very obviously, we used critical idealism a la Hegel and Kant, and even your Sunday school teacher, who perhaps never heard those names in her whole life, was articulating to you the meaning of the Christ happening in terms of these categories. Now, in our time, I tell you, we've got a frightening situation on our hands. And it's something like this, that the whole world view in and through which these various different canopies of reflection existed now has come to an end. I mean, it's come to an end, period. That is, the context in which the church did its reflecting throughout all of these years, the contexts have seemed to be in one context, and that is finished. And for the first time, not the second, not the third, not the fourth, the church is in the midst of the frightening and exciting situation of having to not only alter its tools, but to basically retool the machines that create the tools. This is the radicalness of the hour in which we live. But even this kind of a statement doesn't quite get at the radicalness, for it's only when you attempt to deal with the world over against which this theologizing must take place that you finally see the depth cruciality of the situation that the church is in. For this canopy here represents, and for a moment I want to center your mind on Western civilization, represents the construct of humanness from the very beginning of self-consciousness itself, which is to say that the historians down the line 300 or 400 years, when they attempt to make a statement about the age in which we are living, are going to have to use some such radical category as a mutation in humanness in order to articulate that radicalness. And I would want to suggest they're going to push it further, that maybe this is the first mutation in humanness that has taken place since that aspect of the great evolutionary drama, that's 20th century concept of the evolutionary drama and not the 19th, that since that evolutionary drama burst in to being that aspect of the drama which could interfere with the course of the drama itself, which is to say humanness or self-consciousness. Did you follow that? Not since that era has anything like what is happening today happened. Now, the mutation is in consciousness itself, so you can't see it as you think in terms of the animal, like suddenly you wouldn't have a pinky over some millions of years on account of because you didn't use it anymore, and it's in here, but because it's in there, and what's in here is that which interferes with or dictates the script of the play. This kind of mutation might very well, in terms of our understanding, happen rather rapidly, and it would not surprise me that in a period of time that would be almost a second compared to this period of time, that some other kind of radical mutation that would out-radical the radicalness of our time would take place. This is to say, I mean, something has suddenly sped up in our particular time. I like to say, and we'll come back to it later, that the mutation is that man has become lucid as never before. And you and I, if we are going to be theologians, but I'm not interested in that. That's a means. If you and I are going to be the church in making the possibility of humanness a possibility for all men, that is, be the church in our time, we have to get on top of this radical revolution. We have to be able to build a model that will enable us to be present to this fantastically complex happening that I've called the mutation in humanness. How do we build that model in and through which we can be present and therefore articulate to ourselves and to others what we have to articulate about humanness itself? I like to call this upheaval the cultural revolution, to set it off from the political revolutions such as you had in the 18th century, or the economic revolutions such as you had in the 19th century, or by the social going-onness in life. I mean that political going-onness, that economic going-onness, and then I mean the cultural going-onness. And the revolution in our time is focused not at this point in the triangle, nor this, but rather by this. And you mean something highly concrete when you speak of the cultural revolution. You mean, first of all, the radical alteration in the common sense of mankind. That is to say, whatever we mean to indicate and put quotes around this term by some such category as reality is not what man has meant in the past by that category. And this has come in and through the scientific revolution that began in the 17th century and now has come of age in the very hour in which you and I have our thrust in the great historical drama. And the second thing that I mean by the cultural revolution is the alteration in the style of humanness itself. That is the alteration in the image of human settlement that finally dictates what it means to relate to one another. That's what posture and style in that context finally means. And this has come in and through the very urban revolution of our hour, in which human settlement has changed, as human settlement has never changed in the midst of its thousands of changes in the past. And then finally, what I mean by a cultural revolution is a radical upheaval in I'd like to use the word religion here, but that word has been so misused, so raw that you want to hang it out on a clothesline to dry for about 100 years. So I have to awkwardly talk about the alteration in human mood, or the raw experience at the bottom of being human or self-conscious, beyond which there isn't any experience of humanness whatsoever, or call it a radical alteration in the symbolic light, if you please, of humanness itself, which has come in and through the secular revolution, as we are wont to call it in our time. This is a model in and through which you are present to this upheaval. Now, and I'm going to put a model on the board that draws this together. And you probably sense that I'm a highly dogmatic man. I mean, when I put a model up on the board, that's the way it is, just period. What I'm trying to say is the luxury of sitting back in history and saying, tish, that's not the way it is past. If when you see my model, that's not the way it is, then you stand and be prepared to go up there and put your model on the board. And that's my undogmatism in my dogmatism. Does that get communicated to you? That is this sitting back and saying, that's not the way. Bullshit to that. The time comes, and you got to take a stand. And if you can't stand with me on my stand, then damn you get up there and get your stand, and maybe both of us can alter our stand. This is what it means when you say, this is the time to act. And no man ever acted. I mean acted. Oh, mark you, there's a lot of pinky activism going around today that's not action. I mean, you don't act without a model. And you and I are not going to have the slightest idea what we really mean by that which we call our theologizing, if you're not able to build a model of that time in which you live. And you're not going to be able to declare the gospel. Or mark you, if you're declaring what another age declared to be the gospel, that's not the gospel. That's somebody else's reflection at a different time and place on the gospel, and our reflection on the gospel and the gospel are two different things, always. And lastly, you're not going to be able to walk into that machine gun nest. I mean to prepare, to train, and to lead the troops into it if you do not have a picture of the kind of a world you're moving into. Now, I want to spend the time putting some flesh and blood upon this, and it's an impossible job, for since we are not going to be together very long, I've got to do about 6 things in one time. I sort of have a sense that I'm going to fail in covering it. But when it's time to stop, well, we can stop, and you can go on and do the wrestling that undoubtedly you've already been doing for a long time. I want to talk then about the scientific, the urban, and the secular revolution. And when you and I build a model here, we are not out to be experts to describe the science as such, or the urbane as such, nor the secular as such in one sense. What we are out to do is to get a pattern of the images of humanness that have come to man in terms of what we call these revolutions. as theologians, this is what we have to be after. As many are concerned with the practicalities of humanity and the practical aspects of social existence, what we have to get a hold of is the images of humanness that every man who lives in this time, consciously, unconsciously, have had created in him by these happenings that we call the scientific, the urban, and the secular revolution. Another thing that I think that before we really dig in, that we need to bear in mind is that in your lifetime, golly, it must be horrible to show up in the 20th century, but it's damned exciting too. In your lifetime, you've lived through this coming of age. And you can even remember, if you think, in your time in which the scientific revolution was just whamming. And then at this hour in history, it's shifted. The focal point in civilization today is the urban revolution. And you begin to smell that in the immediate tomorrows, there's going to be a third shift, and it damn well is going to be the secular revolution. And these three cannot be separated whatsoever, that they belong to the same hook of fabric. And save you understand all of them, you do not really understand any. And the ignorance that you sense in terms of certain pure scientists is the ignorance of the sociological and urban revolution, and particularly the ignorance of the secular revolution. So what I'm going to be after is to draw a kind of a map, a chart, a model that will indicate the way in which man's feel after himself, his deep image after himself, has been ordered by these revolutions, and hope that this may help us to draw together the world in which we live. And I think I better begin with the secular revolution, and then as I have time, move back and pick up the others. And I'm going to deal with the secular revolution in and through the master categories of the primordial encounter in humanness or self-consciousness itself. And secondly, I'm going to deal with the destinal response, and then with the primitive conflict, and then with the determinative certitude. Now let's see if we can start. But I have to go back and take a broad sweep in order to get to those categories. Let this canopy here represent the Neolithic man. As Kenneth Olding puts it, this is the age of civilization. You and I are here, and civilization is now past. What we mean to indicate by the verbal sign, civilization is now past, and we are in post-civilization, building a brand new canopy. And I call this the age of Neolithic man. Where does that go back to? 6,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years? I do not know, but that will be a good way for you to get your mind about that period that he calls civilization. And then toward the heart of that age of humanness, something rather fantastic happened. This was between the 8th and perhaps the 4th century BC, and one of the, I don't know what, almost mystical aspects of it is that the damn thing happened at so many places. That is to say, the operating metaphor in and through which men were present to what I call the raw experience of humanness. That metaphor became overt, became objective, was articulated, and it happened among the Semitic people with the Hebrews, it happened among the Aryan peoples in Greece, it happened among the mixed Aryan people in India, it happened in the Oriental people, and I don't want to press this too far, but it would not surprise me when we learn more about that tremendously organized and complex civilization that was in Africa. And mark you, they were not a primitive people in terms of what a bourgeois he called primitive at all. At the time, at the end of the Middle Ages, they had a more complex and highly organized civilization than there was in Europe. It only became what it is today after the damn white man went in there and destroyed it, killing 200 million black people at the same time time, and the next time you get upset over Stalin killing 7 million people, or what is happening in China, you damn well remember that you Western pinkies killed 200 million black men. And I haven't added up the American Indians in North, Central, and South America. And should I go to the islands of the South Seas? Now you remember that, and you just remember that hard. When we learn more about African culture, it would not surprise me, mark you, if we discover that something like that happened in Africa. And to carry this even to the edge of the psychotic itself, it would not surprise me when we learn more, especially about the Mayan culture in Central America, if something like that did not happen there. Something broke loose in humanness itself. Now, mark you, I'm afraid of that kind of insight, because my guts turn over at something that seems beyond my comprehension. And I think that perhaps you can understand that as a theologian. But by golly, it happened in Europe and Asia. And here was formed what I would have called the classical metaphor of into which man was present and articulated to himself and others the raw encounter at the bottom of humanness, and the kind of response that called out that enabled him to know he was human, and the kind of primordial, deep, primitive conflict that set up in his business, in the business of his guts, and then the kind of certitude that required of him. Now, of course, if you went back to this metaphor, to this time, and told those people they were living in a metaphor, they'd poop their pants. Well, that wasn't any metaphor. It's just the way it was. Do you understand that? And the moment that you and I color the metaphor, my God, you're living over here. Do you understand that? And this is the only way we can work with the past, of shedding the skin that we are in, which we cannot do, taking on a skin of another age, which we cannot do, and then looking at what in the devil they were looking at, and then we shed that skin, which you cannot do because you couldn't do it in the first place, and putting back on this skin, which you cannot do because you couldn't do it in the first place, and then looking at what the hell they were putting, and you finally get this is the nonsense of going directly back to the Bible. And those of you who think you're going to renew the church by sitting around and slobbering over the Scriptures, you're just asinine. The only way that could happen is that you're not dealing with the Scriptures, but you're using the Scriptures to help them understand that they are living in a different worldview. You got that picture? And mark you, I didn't do this. I run from God for time to time, but I've never been elected. I showed up in this situation. And the problem is, how in the hell do you get to the bottom of the understanding of it? Now, this was the great classical metaphor. It's gone. I mean, whatever goes on in this universe, which brings things to be and brings them not to be, or used by friend Jeremiah, that roots up nations and plants others, and roots them up and plants others. Mark you, that's the Lord. Whatever else you do, that's the Lord. You lived before that. He chose to bring this classical metaphor into being that brought humanness itself to the fullness of this hour, and then He chose, if I may continue speaking mythologically, He chose to yank it out of existence, and He yanked it forever and forever and forever and forever and forever, and no matter how much it hurts, no matter how much you'd still like me saying that Mrs. Big Bottom's right knee, that's your Sunday school teacher. Hell, this worldview is gone, and it's gone forever and no matter how pious you are, forever and no matter how much comfort it gave you, forever and forever, no matter how much you think you can't live without it, it's gone forever and forever and forever and forever. And the name we are giving to the new metaphor is deception. Well, there's a lot of nonsense going around. I don't know how dear Harvey ever got guts enough to send that book to the printer after chapter 2. Up to there, it was damn useful and lucid. Oh, mark you, the Lord uses what feeble efforts I or dear Harvey get out into history. But how he ever did it, I just do not know. But anyway, you and I have got to quit fooling around and get to the bottom of this, or we've got to keep our big mouths shut. And the basic irony that causes the Rover boys, that's the death of God boys, to have ulcers, is that they haven't got guts enough to shove this down to the bottom and look at what's there. What I'm trying to say is that a metaphor has passed away, and a brand new metaphor, and the irony in it, this is the new, now can I use this word? This is the new religious aspect of humanness. And the ones who wet their britches over that were the ones who never saw that we operate in metaphors. Which is to say, as long as you tie religion to the classical metaphor, then this is a religionless age. But when you see that's a metaphor, what you see is a brand new metaphor into which you're present to and are capable of comprehending the depth experience of humanness as radically altered. Now I want to begin with that primordial encounter. And I'll use Bonhoeffer's terms, though I'm misusing them just a little bit, but they're useful. In the classical metaphor, the raw encounter with that you point to with all kind of categories such as meaning and such as reality, final reality, etc. In the classical metaphor, you met this at the edge. That is the over and the beyond and above. This is where finally humanness became lividly human. You can understand how that operated, and perhaps your memory of Plato would help you best at that point. You remember his worldview. This line here, let that represent the going onness between the no longer and the not yet, the no longer and the not yet that we call history. This was the realm of chaos, the realm of the irrational, the realm of the unexpected, the realm of you don't know what the hell is going to happen next, the realm of getting born, and the realm of getting died, the realm of coming to be, and the realm of coming not to be. And you know how damn frightening that is, don't you? You've been in it recently? Anyway, we're quite well able to comprehend that. But your Greek made an amazing discovery. He made the discovery when you're going along in this realm of change, the unexpected, the no longer, the not yet, that if you would stop and think, mark you in this kind of thinking, you always think backwards. The world stood still. It was cosmos. It was rational. It was orderly. It was once and for all. Now you and I know about that. We've stopped to think. And here the Greek experienced himself in two worlds. And his existential question was, which one of these two damn worlds am I going to call the real? This was a bowel decision. I mean, call the really, really, really. I mean the really, really, really real. He made his decision. And with your tongues hanging out, and mark you, I see him hanging out. You can quite well understand that. This was the really real. And you see, this was not abstract. He was saying, here's where my bowels are filled with humanness. And can't you understand that? I started to whisper because I saw you lower your voices in somewhat of awe. For that's what you experience here. When you make this decision, here's where the awe seeps through. And every Greek play you ever studied was on this one subject of the existential decision. And though this metaphor has a million faces behind it, it's the same decision. That's what you mean. You say you experienced the divine. I mean the human. In this one. Now, I need not go on and point out that metaphor that enables you to make that kind of a decision is gone forever and forever and forever. However, you may transpose the insights that operating metaphor in which men live is gone forever and forever. And now, as Bonhoeffer puts it, we are experiencing the primordial experience, encounter at the center of it all, at the core of the matter. That is to say that the second story is gone, and man is experiencing himself in this one world. And yet the strangeness of it all, and this is why you can talk about a secular revolution, is that the man who precisely embraced this one-story universe to the hilt, I mean became human, that out-humanizes humanness itself. I mean the man who became utterly secular, utterly secular, the man who out-secularizes the secularist. He discovers a wonder. That is to say, at the center of it all, at the bottom of the matter, a transparency occurs. That is exactly when you dare to be human, minus nothing. Dare to be secular, as we like to call it, minus nothing. And you see the frightening of this, because when this worldview was threatened at the end, it began to talk about this not only as the shadowy, but the nasty. You understand that? And we in the church excused our problem by saying the secular world is moving in on us. The man who makes his decision here, and I mean becomes human, and so discovers a transparency at the core, at the bottom. And you little mices who've been playing around, dipping your toes in this area, still trying to hang on to some Heideggerianism, or to the petticoats of Mrs. Big Bottom. You haven't got the foggiest about the transparency. You see, I can't use the word transcendent because that word was too radically captured by this word. It's a transparency, which I say is the awe is seeping through. I mean the awe that dreads your spirit bowels to the bottom and rips and tears and sears and labors, and at the same time fascinates the hell out of them, aren't you? I'm describing your life, and you know damn well I'm describing your life, but I'm not describing your life as some kind of a little pious cleric or man of faith. I'm describing the life of man in the 20th century. And mark you, the man outside of our piosities knows a hell of a lot more about what I'm talking about than you and I do. For if you and I ever lose the insight that us religious folk, us professional, self-conscious, are the last ones to understand, and I'm going to use this word, the divine activity. In the moment we don't remember that, we are lost souls. The man in the street knows more about the raw encounter of humanness than you and I do. I say, here's the awe that dreads and fascinates and rips and tears and breaks one loose and upside downs him and about him places and shoves him into the new and the different. That's the awe. And you can be very concrete. There's nothing abstract about this and nothing mystical about it in the way in which we have used that term. For today, man on the street is experiencing the transparency at the core, the seeping through of the awe in at least three different ways, in my opinion, and one is through the impingement of the inclusive upon the provincial. That is to say, he's experiencing this at the bottom of humanness exactly when that which is beyond his little tiny operating universe seems to reach in and rip his reductionism openly and get him out into breathing air of humanness that is beyond his little provincial parochialisms. Do you understand that in my lifetime, and only in my lifetime, we pinkies finally came to see what in the hell it was to be a pinky? That is to say, we cut the black man off from us and reduced him into something less than human. We cut the red man off from us and reduced him into something less. We cut the yellow man off. We cut the brown man off. We were basket cases going around in our pretensions thinking that we were full human beings, and not only that. You are to the pillar of the illusion yet. We grasped ourselves and announced ourselves as the very epitome of what humanity was in its fullness. And then, lo, as Jean-Paul Sartre puts it, those of us who up to this time had only gazed, suddenly experienced ourselves as gazed at by some damn black face that reminded us of our death illusion, and ripped and tore and broke us loose and forced us into a brand new image of humanness. That's what I mean by the transparency of the poor. That's why you live, you little pretended secularicy, on just one syllable short of being human, because, and now I'm going to swear, you know goddamn well what is waiting you at the heart of the matter when you dare to live in the actuality of the revolution in human mood that God has wrought in our time. Shall I remind you that before you die, that we in the church are going to see that for 2,000 years we've lived in a kind of subtle parochialism that's going to be blasted open. Shall I remind you about your family lives? Shall I remind you about this damn rural mentality that you have? Shall I remind you of the scientific discoveries that both dread and excite the bottom of your being? When you talk, and now I'm going to use the mythological word head on, when you talk of God, you're talking about what goes on in a time, and it has nothing in the first instance to do with the church. For God is God, and every man is over against that which you point to with that category, or you're talking horseshit. And the second way which this sociological analysis of our time discloses the way the transparency occurs is in terms of the impingement of the futuric upon our perpetual archaism, or our perpetual propensity to hang on to the securities of the past. And in our day, you and I experience a going onness, and here you can only use poetic metaphors. Mark you well about that. You experience that experience in which you're seized where you don't know what in the hell. You're seized and ripped loose from your petty little securities in the yesterday that you settle your existence out of. You're ripped loose and about-faced and brutally into the frightening unknownedness of the not yet. And that's what it means to live. I said to live in the 20th century. I think of that woman who opened the Republican convention, whose speech was, "Teach, things aren't the way they used to be." You could see her backing into the future. You see, in the other worldview, the future was the elongation of the past. Do you get this? It was like pulling taffy back in Ada, Ohio, in which you stretched it out and you create the future by elongating the past. And what's happened in our time is exactly the opposite. Man has been broken loose and turned about into the dreadfulness and fascinatingness of the not yet. That, if I may use this language is what man who lives in the secular metaphor means by the divine, by God. And if you don't like those language, you see, we don't care, for you're pointing to a realness, not to an idea. And it's an awareness that's there for every man. And the third thing that you mean, the transparency of the core is the impingement of the intentional. I mean, of the radical intentional upon a propensity to be, what shall I say it, themselves, sometimes spelled S-L-O-B-S. And in our day, the finger's been put on us. I mean the finger has been put on us. We have been shoved, pushed, pulled to radical intentionality. I think of old Samuel in the Old Testament, if I may use this poetic figure, who heard his name called 3 times before he had the slightest idea that this was a destinal mark. My name's Joseph. About the only people who ever call me that are my mother and my wife. And whenever they do, I feel guilty immediately. But you understand, they touch the core. Somewhere that name labels the unrepeatable, unique Joseph Wesley Matthew. Some other guys have stolen that name, but fundamentally, the name Joseph means this. You got that picture? It's marinated. And in the midst of the utter humanness, the utter secularity of existence, it's as if I hear my name called from down the corridors of time. Joseph! And what I hear is the inescapable requirement to be what I am. It's not unreasonableness. Who radically intends, who assumes responsibility for the not yet, who decides to write the very script of history itself, who alone, if you please, intends that history shall go this way or not that way. This is the bottom of humanness and the secular, where man, who one day I have language, experiences the raw bottom of what in the hell it means to be self-conscious. And then you can shove my images out. When you are shoved out into the comprehensive that is beyond the comprehensive, where there are no walls, and I mean no walls, where there are no things that are unclean, where finally the universe as it is your home. Then you experience the white hotness of the encounter that dreads you so and fascinates you the more. And then finally you grasp yourself and shoved into utter open-endedness, in which you grasp that beyond the openness that demands this step and this step, there is sheer openness. Then it is, you know what, the dread of the past. And when you experience the demand to be intentional, it passes beyond every decision, leaving only another decision, leaving only another decision, leaving only another decision. Then you begin to grasp how the encounter in the secular metaphor has the kind of power that fantastic classical metaphor had in its time. The power that if you fool with it, if you play with it, it'll burn you into a cinder. And if you embrace it, it shall make you human beyond any greeting you have of humanness. Now I've got to hurry, but you remember that this ancient metaphor was a glorious metaphor. The way I spot a phony is someone who has to beat over the head that which was before him. If you have to beat over the head of the church, for instance, I know damn well you're a phony. You're like 2 boys in the same family. One knuckles under and one rebels. But the one who rebels has to have a hold of Papa's lapels while he beats him on the shins. You got that picture? The man who picks himself up as a human being and lives before the depths of what goes on in this universe, he can say to his old man, "You pig, you, I affirm your being in history." And when that happens, you begin to see the glory of the pigginess of your old man and the glory that transcends pigginess itself. But you have to be a free man. I mean a man who's decided to live in terms of the encounters of his time to do that. This classical metaphor was a glorious one, and our medieval fathers filled it full with a richness that when you look at it, you're almost awestricken. But it is no more. But it is no more. And we live in this metaphor. And now if you'll allow me to use head-on theological jargon, which you do not use when you're making the sociological analysis. And mark you, this is not theology we're dealing with, it's sociology. Here is men meeting God. I don't mean God. I mean God. Now you're deaf at God boys. I call them the Rover boys. There's a couple of ironies relative to them. And I feel you and I need to know it. I was on platforms with some of you 10 years ago, and I want to bear you witness, and 20 years ago even more, that at that time, when it was relevant to talk about the death of God, and we had many metaphors, images, poetic phrases, who were like the silence of God. We spoke of the hiddenness of God. We spoke of the remoteness of God. But none of these were quite powerful enough. The poetic figure, the death of God, had to be used. And what you were pointing to is the passing away of this image. And I mean, it was passed away. And in those days when it was relevant to announce the death of God, some of those boys tried to slip out by grabbing hold of what I call a naive Bardianism, of one last attempt to hang on to the world which hadn't been there for 300 years. But it was relevant 20 years ago because in the midst of World War II, that which happened 300 years ago in one sense penetrated the spirit dimension of man. And now, 20 years later, they bare their manly bosoms. When there's nothing to risk, I mean there's nothing to risk. Nothing to risk. Because everyone knows God is dead. Even the one who has not allowed himself to know it knows it. And announce God is dead. But now the front lines are way up there. For the God who borns himself and dies himself and borns himself again is today borning himself anew. But on his terms, not on ours. And if you don't understand that I use metaphorical language even to say that, then you have not heard it. There are always prophets come too lately. And what I fear is that the church, who now for 100 years has grabbed the caboose of the train as it goes down through history, once again, thinking they're on the cowcatcher, are really going to be riding the caboose. When man in the secular world, he is way down there somewhere. That is to say, in the inner city today, don't you little social action characters think that now the edge is there. Good Lord, every bastard and his brother, including Lyndon Johnson, knows the problem is there. The war is way out here. Your problem is the spirit problem, or to put it bluntly, it's the nigger image that the white man has scarred on the psyche of the Negro is where the problem is. Now, I've got to hurry, and I'm not even going to try to do the scientific and urban revolution. I'll just finish this and stop very quickly. Now, what's the destinal response here? And the classical image was very, very clear. What you did was to reproduce eternal patterns. Do you understand that? There were eternal forms or patterns of humanness. There was a human nature. And man's job was to get a hold of that pattern and then spend his life trying to reproduce it. You got that picture? That's what ethics finally was based upon in that image. Of course, there were a lot of fights, but the guys were fighting in the same bed under the same pair of sheets. That is to say, they quarreled as to who had the best picture, and the most true one, there weren't any more than one, they all knew that, the truest one, and whose method of getting it was best. Some said it's best through the process of ratiocination. Others said through direct intellectual intuition. Others said by intuitive sensitiveness. And others said it floated down out of, I don't know where, in little black books, with gold edges around them. You got that picture? All of them in the same bed, operating in the same picture, but kicking each other as to who had the best in the midst of it all. Now that's gone forever and forever. The response to the encounter at the center is not to reproduce eternal patterns, but to create temporal models that determine the future of history. That's the key of morality. That's the basis of situational contextual ethics, inside or outside the church. And that's the way it is, in spite of asses like Fitch out in the West Coast there, who would give his 3 right arms to go back to this worldview where there were some eternal values and unchanging principles that a man could depend on. Need I spell that out further? Now I come to what I call the primitive conflict. In the old classical image, the basic conflict was with natural demons, and marked the conflict is with the demons. I can't think of a better poetic figure for the moment that you experience what I've talked about and have decided to make your response there rather than in the superficialities of life. Then you experience the blocks and the deep struggle that is always present in selfhood. And in the old image, using the word natural in a spatial way, the struggle was with natural powers. I do not mean simply animism in some primitive societies. We like to think about it simply that you have it in Freud. That is, I'm the victim of external forces and internal powers. You won't believe this, but still, in the middle of Chicago, sociologists and psychologists are dealing with so-called juvenile delinquents in terms of their being a victim of their external environment or their early home conditioning. Do you know that? And do you know that some men who are fleeing from ministry by going into pastoral counseling, that is, they don't know what the gospel of Jesus Christ is, so they try Rogers, that they are operating with the idea that man is a victim of some external problem or some early problem in his history. This is what I mean by operating in the old classical image in this world. In our day today, in the secular metaphor, the primitive conflict is historical. That is to say, if I give my mama the power to be the meaning of my life, my mama is damn well the power that controls the meaning of my life. But you do not forget it. My mama never has that power because she's my mama. She only has that power because I couldn't handle my own life and therefore gave it over to somebody to handle. Did you follow that? If the Methodist Church rules your life, don't think it rules your life because it's the Methodist Church. It rules your life because you damn well didn't have guts enough to live your own life, and you handed that power over to some. And this is what irritates me in little shriveling, snot-nosed, griping, bitching clergymen against the structures. You can always smell one in terms of this kind of snot-nosed-ism because you're not the victim of anything save you've given the power of your life to it. And don't you think that your little shriveled up wife who's a shrike has that power over you because she is who she is. No woman ever castrated a man save a man delivered unto her the scissors and exposed himself. Are you clear about that? This is what it means that today our struggle is with historical demons. I mean the demons that you and I finally created because we could not live. And that's a different kind of a world than was there in the past. And the last category, and when you come here, the problem of certitude, I don't mean certitude in terms of abstractions that you have in certain scientific disciplines. I mean the deep personal certitude of life. And in the old image, certitude was a matter of authority. When you deal with ideas about life rather than with life itself, your problem of certitude is always who says so, or the question of authority. Do you understand that? The moment that a world sees that the statement A is better than B is a nonsensical statement, unless you disclose the third term of C, because everybody knows that relative to D, the B is better than A. The moment you see that, authority, as it operated in this, is gone forever and forever and forever. For you cannot say, Tillich, he say so, on account of Tillich, the worms are eating up what is left of his ashes. Shall I dramatize this on Bacche? That's gone forever and forever. And the world knows it, and the Roman Catholic Church is knowing it. Are you clear about that? Because they live in the new metaphor. And today, in terms of the new metaphor, destinal determinative certitude is a matter of authenticity. Don't you understand that? Every decent bit of writing you read in terms of the 20th century world has screamed that. And it scared the daylights out of most of us. What does authenticity mean? Something like this, I think, to put it dramatically. Here I go along in this givenness of life. I have to make a decision. And in the midst of facing that decision, I take a leap. Not out of this world, just down here to the end of it. That's the 6-foot hole down there. You know which one I mean? And I just get my large toes on there. About 4 weeks ago, I buried my oldest brother. It was all wrapped up, finished, ended, complete. Kaput. Jim and I stood there because we dropped him in. Anyway, you got your Bigfoot toes, not on Brother Hootie's 6-foot holes, but on Joseph's. And you have to get in this posture. You can't understand what I mean. And when you stand there, your life is not a matter of 1,000,001 decisions. It's just one. Do you understand that? Your life isn't a matter of 1,000,001 jobs or actions. It's just one. You grasp yourself in Luther's language as a thrust in civilization, as a bump in the plane. Just one. And you damn well have to decide, without appeal and with no external help, how in the hell you're going to go around that clock once. And you alone, me not so, can make that decision. I finally cannot help you, and you finally cannot help me. Because I can't get born for you, I can't get died for you. We two are getting born and are getting died alone. And therefore, at the tips of it all, we decide how we're going to travel the journey. That's authenticity. That is authenticity. And that's the secular metaphor in which you live when you penetrate into the bottoms of humanness and the secular. And every man in the 20th century knows about it. I'm speaking of every man and woman in your pew. And because you haven't got guts enough to live in the actualities of the 20th century world or post-civilization, you think you have to pretend that they don't even know about it. How self-deceived you get. For I've described the man on the street.
Of physics. Theology has to do with pointing to what is just there in life, just happening in the midst of our being. When Joe outlined for you what we're going to do, the theology section of our course suggested we would talk on God this afternoon, the Christ tonight, and in the morning on the Holy Spirit. Then we would turn to the church, which is of course presupposed in this whole Trinitarian understanding, and is that community and through which this way of talking about life with these three symbols came into being. Now, when we're pointing with God, we're pointing to the up againstness is one very helpful phrase to me. Not just any old up againstness, but the ultimate up againstness, the final up againstness, up against which every single human being who ever existed from the beginning of time to the end of time was just that up against. When we talked about that up againstness in Chinese, or African Zulu, or English, Hebrew, or Quickmo, this up againstness that we need to point to in this category of G-O-D. And when we talk about the Christ happening, we're talking about a happening indeed to the human life, and not just any ordinary happening, but how can you say something that means the happening? The happening to any man who's ever existed from the beginning of time to the end of time. Whenever this happening happened, it was the Christ happening. It was the happening in terms of which life was radically revolutionized. Life is radically reoriented. Man is given his full humanness. Man is upended and given a way of deciding about his total existence in a radical new manner. An event in the life depths of a human being now, that kind of a relevance of that word, and the Holy Spirit, turning to a kind of responding in the universe, an acting outedness, a quality, a drive, a presence in the midst of the people, in the midst of the person. Everybody responds to life. Everybody acts out in life. But a particular kind of acting outedness, the kind of acting outedness that one knows when he's come up against the final up againstness in the context of having had take place, the final taking place of this, and then having an acting outedness, that kind of an acting outedness. This Trinitarian understanding is saying one and the same thing, and we want to push at it on these three angles, of course, as is almost now established in history. But I want to do two jobs this afternoon in preparation for our seminar on God. The first job I want to do is an objective job of pointing to the image of man that we have been given to us by the post-Einsteinian scientific revolution. Joe mentioned to you that many people are imaging our time as a time so radical that you have to go back to the time when civilization came into being to get a turning point that radical in history so that you can talk about pre-civilization or civilization and post-civilization. Bonhoeffer talks about as man come of age, everything being adolescence and childhood up to this point. Some way to get a radical picture of the turning point that mankind has been going through the last ages. And the revolution we are now in this moment in history, is a cultural revolution. And by culture, you mean the intellectual or the common sense of a group. You mean the common style and the common mood, or that feel after humanness. Joe worked here this morning primarily in his lecture, and the common style we would be pointing to urbanization, and what that has meant for the remodeling of all of the mores and ways related to one another in our postmodern or post-civilization or post-age. And here by the common sense, we would be pointing to the taken for bed images that get us out of bed in the morning and send us to bed at night. What images are present in the post-Einsteinian science which has formed our common sense that tell us how we must grasp the being of man, or the individual through which we are grasping the being of man. That's the first job I want to do. And the second job is an analysis of what you might call the spirit problem of 20th century man. The interior relationship with the going onnesses of our time. How is man's problem of the spirit coming to him? And my job here would be to just lay this out in an objective fashion as the data collected by our corporate life throughout these many experiences and so forth has systematized it. Now, to give an illustration of the kind of thing that we're talking about, let me read a little poetry. Every man of spirit has to have poems. Poems just enable you to experience yourself as a man of spirit. And poetry does strange different kinds of jobs, too. First one I want to read, and when it gets here, this is a poem that comes out of the science of our day. It's really biology, but you sense the poetic images that are present in this biology. It began, as such things always begin, in the ooze of unnoticed swamps, in the darkness of eclipsed moons. It began with strangled gasping for air. The pond was a place of reek and corruption, of fetid smells and of oxygen-starved snake fish breathing through laboring gills. At times, the slowly contracting circle of the water let little minnows of minnows who skittered desperately to escape the sun, but who died nevertheless in the fat, warm mud. It was a place of low life. In it, the human brain began. There were strange snouts in those waters, strange barbels nuzzling the bottom ooze, and there was time, 300 million years of it. But mostly, I think it was the ooze. By day, the temperature of the world outside the pond was of frightful intensity. At night, the sun went down in smoking red. Dust storms marched in incessant progression across a wilderness whose plants were plants of long ago, leafless and weird and stiff. They lingered by the water. All over the vast areas of grassland uplands, the wind blew until red stones took on the polish of reflecting mirrors. There was nothing to hold the land in place. Winds howled, dust storms rolled, brief erratic torrents choked with silt ran down to the sea. It was a time of dizzying contrasts, a time of change. On the rocky surface of the pond, from time to time, a snout thrust upward, took in air with a queer, grubbing inspiration, and swirled back to the bottom. The pond was doomed, the water was foul, the oxygen almost gone, but the creature would not die. It could breathe air direct to a little accessory lung, and it could walk. In all the weird and lifeless landscape, it was the only thing that could. It walked rarely, and under protest, but that was not surprising. The creature was a fish. In the passage of days, the pond became a puddle. But the snout survived. There was a dew one dark night, and in a coolness an empty stream bed. When the sun rose next morning, the pond was an empty place of cracked mud, but the snout did not lie there. He had gone downstream over other ponds. He breathed there for a few hours and hobbled slowly along on the stumps of heavy fins. It was an uncanny business. If there had been anyone there to see, it was a journey best not observed in daylight. It was something that needed swamps and shadows and a touch of the night dew. It was a monstrous penetration of a forbidden element. And the snout kept his face hid from the light. It was just as well. Though the face should not be mocked, in 300 million years it would be our own. Another poem in our time, shoving into the deeps of spirits as we experience ourselves as spirits. Our beast in the bourgeois is, especially the male of the species, presentable, eminently presentable. Shall I make you a present of him? Isn't he handsome? Isn't he healthy? Isn't he a fine specimen? Doesn't he let the fresh, clean Englishman outside? Isn't it God's own image, trampling his 30 miles a day after partridges, or a little rubber ball? Wouldn't you like to be like that? Well off, and quite the thing? Oh, but wait. Let him meet the emotion. Let him be faced with another man's need. Let him come home to a bit of moral difficulty. Let life face him with a little man on his understanding, and then watch him go soggy, like a wet meringue. Watch him turn into a mess, either a fool or a bully. Just watch the display of him, confronted with a new demand on his intelligence, a new life demand, how beastly the bourgeois is, especially the male of the species. Now nicely groomed like a mushroom, standing there so sleek and erect and pliable, and like a fungus, living on the remains of bygone life, sucking his life out of the dead leaves of real life of his own. Even so, he's stale. He's been there too long. Touch him, you'll find he's all gone inside. Just like an old mushroom, all wormy inside, and hollow, under a smooth skin, and an upright appearance, full of seething, wormy, hollow feelings, rather nasty. How beastly the bourgeois is, standing in their thousands, these appearances in damp New Jersey. What a pity they can't all be kicked over and left to melt back swiftly into the soil. Well, my ancient poem friend Paul also needs to be heard. As far as we are concerned, we do not wish to stand in anyone's way, nor do we wish to bring discredit upon the ministry God has given us. Indeed, we want to prove ourselves genuine ministers of God, whatever we have to go through. Patient endurance of troubles or even disasters. Being flogged in prison, being mobbed, having to work like slaves, having to go without food or sleep. All this we want to meet with sincerity, with insight and patience, by sheer kindness and the power of the Holy Spirit, with genuine love, speaking the plain truth, and living by the power of God. Our sole defense, our only weapon, is a life of integrity. How about that line one more time, huh? Our sole defense, our only weapon, is a life of integrity. Whether we need honor or dishonor, praise or blame, called impostors, we must be true, called nobodies. We must be in the public eye, never far from death. Yet here we are, alive, always are going through it, yet never going completely under. We know sorrow, yet our joy is inextinguishable. We have nothing to bless ourselves with, yet we bless many others with true riches. We are penniless. And in reality, we have everything worth having. Scientific revolution of our time began in the 19th century in a way. When Newton finally put together the insights that Galileo, Copernicus, and others, mathematicians, been scrambling for, he got started with great passion, what he might call a scientific revolution, and I like to use Beverly as my symbol for this period. And we'll just talk about the Middle Ages as that which existed before then, the Einsteinian science of that day. And we're now out into that's the Einsteinian, Aristotelian. Now we're out into the Einsteinian era. And the way that they thought about man and the way they thought about life here is, of course, just radically different from here and here. And yet, this period is a transitional period in the thinking of man, in which the themes of the great scientific era in which we're now moving were born, but in which still the grave clothes and fundamental images of the Aristotelian world hung on. Now we're in a post-Aristotelian age. I mean post-Aristotelian. And any Neo-Thomism and any Neo-Aristotelianism is utterly inadequate in most all cases. You might get enough Neo to get almost broken loose from Aristotle entirely. Then you're moving out into this era of which we are a part. Back here, everybody thought the world was a disk with a dome over the top of it. And that was just the way the world was. Up was up, down was down. those were immutable directions, you might say. Everything was made up of four substances, air, earth, fire, and water. Two of them levitated, and the other two gravitated. Air and fire levitated, and the other two gravitated. And it was that everything in reality was made of some kind of substance. And every substance had its propensity. Its inbuilt propensity, its law within its being. Air and fire just naturally went up until they found their rest, an upward place. And earth and water naturally moved downward until they found their rest in an earthward direction. And man, you want to talk about man in this context, he obviously had his essence. He obviously had his substance, and whether you thought of him as a rational soul, which was a substantial category, or however you put it, a ghost, or whatever, the substantial categories were the only categories they had, so they had to think about man as a ghost. When you looked into his inner being, this ghost had its interior propensity. It sought for its final end. It wanted to find, you might say, its rest somewhere. Don't you hear that saying? It's coming through. You still see it on old tombstones, don't you? Where it says, rest in peace. That's just good medieval science. The man saw his ultimate end, his final happiness. These are the kind of categories in which they worked scientifically in their day, and the kind of categories that they had, therefore, to talk about something that made sense in their time. Now, this kind of penetrated, of course, all of their thinking. And when we moved on to this world, a certain kind of bridge took place. When you brought vacuum into the midst of this substantial universe and started talking about particles that related to one another in mechanical manner, you had a whole new kind of way of talking going on. And your fundamental picture, which they applied both to the solar system and to the atom, and looked something like this, some kind of nucleus with rotations around it. And this was a symbol of a clock, of a machine, of all kinds. Everything was in one sense or another mechanical sort of reality. Now this is broken loose. Our fundamental images are no longer particles in mechanical array. And this is hard for us to get our mind around. It came through most verifying when people looking at the atom. And finally it dawned on people that this picture of the atom is a necessary picture. Now this is a wrong picture in other ways. As an array of energy relationships in which the electron was not a particle, but an electron was a wave. And if the whole complex of what you once pointed to with the category nucleus could be pointed to just as realistic in other ways, and all disintegrated into matrices or formulas which talked about the energy relationships within the structure of matter. So that you just have energy. If you want to talk about it that way. If you want to use this model, it's still useful for some purposes and so forth, but obviously it's just a model, and there may be much better ones, and this is not, in any case, a picture of reality. It is a model in man's mind with which he attempted to grasp the reality he was trying to grasp. The fundamental picture of the universe, as you look outward, is also an energy picture. It is imagined that back here in the beginning was a gigantic, overwhelming explosion in which the universe got started. And whoosh, everything was expanding in every possible complex interspatial curved dimension you can think of, coming to a final cooling off place out into the mysterious beyond the time of man is even around to observe it. It's just like a whoosh, and then this utter final disintegration. Some such picture of the cosmos is present there. And even if they modify it by coming and going, expanding and so forth, it's still a radically different, a new picture than we had back here. Now, as we try to push down the images of man that were operating in these eras, back here it was two-story. Well, it was two-story. The man was two-story. You had your natural substance and your ghost substance. Your natural body and your rational soul. Everything was two-story. There was the realm of things you could see, observe, taste, touch, and so forth, and then there was the eternal realm up there, somewhere, in terms of which everything was interpreted and understood and so forth. When you move out of the Newtonian period, there was a shift. because of what happened in the natural order, but fundamentally the two-story thing was maintained all through this era. And sometimes we had something like material values and spiritual values, which was again that kind of strange dichotomy. There was the soft-headed people who wrote letters and poems and that kind of stuff. Then there were the hard-headed scientists who looked at the facts. This kind of dichotomy. Or there was the university where the real hard-headed study went on. And then alongside of it, we had a Wesley Foundation or some other campus ministry there. There was a radical dichotomy drawn down between the spiritual, whatever that meant, and the material, and of course we knew what it meant. We were trying to grasp realities in this kind of a dichotomy. Now these dichotomies have just been exploded to smithereens. We don't have any dichotomies left. We have a unity. Well, I think the word singular is the image. Man is not two parts. There's not a spiritual part and a material part. There's just one part. And now there's many phases and poles and dimensions of man, but you don't think of him as made up of parts. When you think of the will or the mind or the spirit or the body, these are not substantial parts or particles that make up the whole mechanism man. They are poles of one unified existence. Man is one thing, one reality. You maybe can think of it, he is one mass of energy that bursts into being, and he goes, he is one historical thrust that bursts into being and thrusts its being out into death. That's the image of man, of any being whatsoever that's present in our hour. This time energy thrust. You look at a mouse. A mouse has so many heartbeats. That's what a mouse is. And a squirrel, a squirrel has the same number of heartbeats that a mouse has. The only difference is that it takes a squirrel 2 years or more, maybe 3, to beat out all of his heartbeats, and a mouse who does it in a little over a year. But again, the same number of beats. They just move at a different pace. The elephant, same number of beats as the mouse and the squirrel, but the elephant takes about 100 years to get him beat. Boom, boom, boom. But it's all the same thing. Man also is all the same thing. So many throbs of life are given to man, and that is his existence. He is a singular being. And you talk about man's transcendence. You talk about his capacity to stand apart and get some distance and consciousness and lucidity about the fact that he is a thrust, and therefore enter into deciding how that thrust is going to thrust itself in human existence. What destiny he is going to choose for the trust that he must trust in history. Or to use another image, the next one here that I want to mention. Back here everything was substantial. And here it still was substantial. We had more substances or particles was probably our category. Now the primary category is relationships. Which again, this fundamental energy concept is going through here. I am a network of relationships. That is the way I talk about my being. I'm in a relationship with Africa. I'm in a relationship with Asia. I'm in a relationship with India. I'm in a relationship with my wife. Some people say, how in the world can I get related in this world? That's not the problem. I'm so damn related it nauseates me. My problem is what to do with the relationships that I am, or how I relate to the network of relationships that I am already. Maybe Joe got caught along this way this morning, getting you better, smiling. But this is really which 20th century science has grappled with man. I'm a white man, I'm a male, and so forth, and all of these are relationships. I can understand myself as a bunch of substances. And then, here, the universe was static. And it was static because it was if when you stop to think, you do have a certain static field, and William Man was a very rational man. He stopped to think. As he stopped to think, time stood still, and he was looking for the universals. The universals that were true in every time. And that's the way thought always comes to you when you think about it. It is a quest for the universal knowledge that hold together all the particulars of time. And so he thought of the universe as something utterly static. And he was out after the real universe of universals. The real universals. Or however you talk about that. things were just static. His images of everything were static. He was looking for the essence of everything. And the time period was still static. And there was motion, wheels and then wheels and so forth. They still were looking for the law of the universe. The static governing principles of reality, or however you might put that. Now our image of man and of any being is that of a dynamic. Man is dynamic. My essence is dynamic. My very being is dynamic. I am energy. You cannot say you have got Gene Marshall's essence wrapped up some way, because you look tomorrow and there's a different essence going on in history. I am not the same as I was 5, 10, 15 years ago, and I will not be the same 5 years from now that I am now. My being is dynamic and is a function of decisions and events and so forth in this kind of a way. To look for the essence of man, and in the way they're looking for the essence of man is a nonsense to us. Finally, and this is maybe the most important, is that here there is the law of interior disposition of the cause and effect of things. You look for the interior drive of every reality, of the interior quest of man. And here you had objective cause and effect. That life went on in terms of objective rulers out here in the universe, like a bunch of billiard balls on the table. One billiard ball hit another one, that hit the cushion, bounced off, and so forth, and all the way around the room, so that you had a reaction-action situation. And every reality is understood that way. You look for the law of history, for example, whether it was historical determinism of Marxism or the hidden hand of Adam Smith. All these people are looking for the law that ran the economic life, or the law of history that ran this, or the law of history that ran that. Not seeing, although a few skeptics pushed them on it, that cause and effect, or the law of the cause and effect, were images in man's mind. And were not objective reality. There is no law of the universe to be discovered. What we discovered now is that history is open. Man is in the midst of a process that is beyond his comprehension, and his understanding of causation is statistical in terms of the signals that he's been able to pick up, in terms of the understanding of things he's been able to grab hold of. He puts together his most comprehensive picture in terms of which he remembers the past and anticipates the future, knowing that tomorrow he has to put together a new picture in which to anticipate the past and the future. But there is no law of the universe, but there is this map, this architectural design that man himself lays over the reality of his time. Which means that man in normal is an image maker, a model maker. He is a creative being, and that's the way his intellectual power comes to him. Here, so much was understood about the law of the universe, that man's image of himself was as a victim, a conscious being whose job it was to discover what the law of things out here was, him being a victim, finally, of them. And this interpenetrated every discipline in civilization, from the idea of inevitable progress that came up. There was some law that progressed you upward, and spinning on the side of the law wasn't going upward. There was some law that progressed you downward. There is no law like that. There are trends that have been set up in history by human decisions over against the given of history. And these human decisions have set up the trends. Man has within his capacity the possibility of deciding the course of history. Now, this image of man as an energy, a singular network of relationships and dynamic process of creating history, this is simply the common sense of the post-Einsteinian era. This is simply the way a modern man must think about himself now. We have rediscovered at the very roots of scientific investigation this free creativity that man is. And this model of reality in a man that emphasized so much the necessary or the determined in existence is finished. It's gone. It is now inadequate to the grasp the grasp man has of reality in this moment in history. And this is interpenetrated, as I suggest, every discipline of learning, psychology, sociology, and everything. We have any excuse to think of ourselves as finally victims of our environment, operating in history on the yo-yo principle, We never can do anything but respond to what somebody else does. But here, in this understanding, we know that we have the power to move into history, grab hold of it, and then decide its direction it will go. Now, in this context, a new kind of intellectual climate, a fantastic lucidity about the spirit problem of man has been born. A fantastic lucidity, and I want to turn to that now. So, you might say that this Western civilization, as Western civilization was, beginning with Plato, Aristotle, and so forth, experienced a very bad, and that would be called the death of God and all of that. And but now a birth of a brand new world is taking place, and in this new birth, man is experiencing his spirit problem in a fantastically new and different way. If you went back and historically tried to just look at the interior story of Western man, in the 19th century there was a overwhelming optimism. Everything was on the up and up. The laws of history were leading us toward a great future. We had finally solved the fundamental problems. There was a kind of confidence and so forth. And when World War I hit, you had what some people call the giddy teens. You had a certain kind of naive enthusiasm in the church, save the world in one generation, and so forth. And then this turned to a noisy 20s, in which back behind the scenes you could sort of feel the insecurity of the Western world being felt, but they were taken out by the kind of exaggerated enthusiasm, exaggerated buoyance, which bear witness to a happening down beneath the surface deeper than mankind was willing to really lay hold of. When the Depression hit, and the October revolutions in Russia and so forth, which really socked Western man in the billfold, things became very quiet. The mood became very quiet. Still somewhat optimistic, but a hush fell over civilization. And then World War II hit that impossible world that should never, any touch of imagination ever happen according to the anticipations of Western man. The depths of the bottom of history fell out below them, and the question was screamed out, who in the world is in charge here? Hitler and people like that were in charge because they'd taken charge, and so forth and so on. Men went out to the trenches, and they experienced the absolutely incredible horrors of World War II, the dropping of the atom bomb, the birth of atomic energy in history. And in the 50s, students, they went to study. They went to get to the bottom of things. What in the world was going on? And they studied, many of them. And they studied until they found that there was no bottom. And then we got real serious. Real serious people. In these strange 60s, a new mood has been born. And I want to wait just a moment to talk about that. But I want to analyze these two moods in terms of an image that held of a feeling that went along with them, and of a way of escape from life that was common. And what I'm talking about here is was present going on every man, and of course this points to the deeps of existence that every man will always experience it to some extent, and the question. The kind of deep, fundamental question that mankind was asking of himself. Here the image was that of the void, or of the apocalypse, or the atomic bomb, if you like that symbol, of just falling off into nothingness. It was a time in which people who were in college, who read books like I did in college in the 50s, they wake up or blow up, huh? And the kind of mood that was on the college campuses and all sensitive persons at that time, or the kind of feel, was that of futility. Just apathy was another way we felt. Just unwillingness or incapacity to move, or know why we're moving. Just the feeling of utter uselessness, utter nothingness in civilization. Some of the old heads in civilization at that time wagged their head, and said, why are the college students so apathetic? Why do they read those nasty old poets and those nasty existential authors and so forth? What's the matter with the kids? Why don't they cheer up, get themselves a job, and be happy? What's the matter with them? Well, you know how it is. Hell, you got a belly full of futility, you got a belly full of futility, that's all. And somebody let his belly out there, feeling the times, and knew what he was feeling, and was responding to it in all the imperfect ways. And the escape, my heavens, it was hiding, every possible way you could turn to hide from reality. Those who were being shaken loose from their hiding, the question they were asking, the deep question is, who am I? Well, that's not a way to put it, because this is a gut question, a spirit question. It was the question of identity that you can only ask with the deeps of your being when just the whole meaning of life is just collapsed in front of you, and you go chasing back through history like Mumford and many other people really try to put back together what it really means to be man. And you're chasing back through the scriptures like the theologians did to try to put back together what on earth it means to be a man of faith.